Mr. Jaggi, a very warm welcome to you. I'll take a quick minute to introduce you and then we can move on to your presentation. So, Mr. Puneet Jaggi is the founder of Prescinto Technologies and co-founder Gensol Group. He's going to be talking to us about business models, cost trends, and outlook in solar O&M. He's a clean energy enthusiast who has been an advisor to 30 gigawatts of renewable energy projects. He has digitized 10 gigawatt and operated 3 gigawatt of renewable energy projects, led a team of 800 renewable energy technocrats with business spread across 14 countries, connected over 300 renewable energy plants and 1,000 engineers processing a billion signals daily. So that's some impressive credentials. And Mr. Jaggi, we are ready to begin with your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Khushbu, for that more impressive introduction than I really deserve, but thanks a ton.
No, I'm sure you do deserve it. So that's
try to share my screen and let me know if you are able to see it clearly or not.
Sure. Yeah, we can start. Yeah, we can see your screen clearly.
Awesome. Great. So the topic of my deck today is the evolution of solar operation and maintenance. We'll talk about cost trends and business models that have been evolving. But let me just zoom out at a macro level for a second. At a macro level, if you see that for the last 75 odd years, our grid has largely remained unchanged. What I mean by that is that the transmission lines and the transformers and the electric grid, by and large, has been unchanged over the last 75 odd years. Right? It's only in the last 10 years that we have these new kids on the block, the millennials, so to say, the solar and wind category, which have been able to create some degree of vibrancy in the grid. Now, on top of that, when you try to superimpose the other tech disruption which is happening, unlimited internet penetration, unlimited mobile penetration, unlimited cloud storage, unlimited cloud computing, it is a recipe for a very interesting mix and what we are actually seeing unfolding in the solar O&M sector as well. Now, with that context given, let me dive into how the market first and foremost evolved over the last 10 odd years. In 2010, we had bids in the range of about 18 rupees to 15 rupees a unit, whereas today that bidding has got reduced to less than 2.5 rupees a unit. There are different things have been responsible in different points of this time and timeline to be able to make this impact. At one point of time in the earlier years, it was driven largely by the cost decrease of solar panels. There was a huge global PV overcapacity. Also, the project sizes went up from 1 megawatt to 20, from 20 to 50, 50 to 100 megawatts, and so on. So there was economies of scale at play, as a result of which the bidding rates came down. Now, in 2015-16, India started showing early signs of grid parity when the cost of solar power was at par with the average cost of power in the grid. As a result of which, we had a lot of international fund flow. We had sovereign wealth funds, we have pension funds, we had ESG impact funds, and so on, who invested in India in a major way. So reducing the cost of finance became a major impetus to the growth of the sector, and the cost came down from 6 rupees a unit to about 4 rupees a unit. Now, having exhausted almost everything else in 2017 and thereon, the last battleground on which all the developers, all the owners are fighting with each other today is the O&M and generation optimization. That's the last thing. You have already optimized on scale, already optimized on cost of finance, already optimized on superior supply chain. Now, the last battleground where people are lugging it out is optimization of operation and maintenance and optimization of generation. Now, let us see in this context of this pressure of operation and maintenance, what has been the trend over the last couple of years at least. Now, in 2018, I remember that contracts tended to be in the range of about 3 lakh rupees per megawatt or so. It came down to almost about 2 lakh rupees a megawatt or so nowadays, or last year. And in fact, by next year, the expectation is that the cost is going to go below 1.5 lakh rupees per megawatt. Now, there are multiple reasons why this has happened, and I'll be covering some of them in my subsequent slides as well. But broadly speaking, solar O&M has suffered from a 1% syndrome. What I mean by that 1% syndrome is, if you look at some of the traditional financial models that were made during bidding stages by some of the developers, we used to see that the cost of O&M simply used to be 1% of the capex cost. Now, while your solar module prices were coming down and your structure was getting optimized and your cabling was getting optimized, it was very difficult to assume that your manpower is going to get optimized in operation and maintenance using the same metric. And 1%, if the cost came down from 5 crores to 2.5 crores to set up a solar plant, automatically the cost of O&M should also come down. But it did, whatever mattered. And I'm completely complicit in the same game where we have had to reduce pricing in order to be able to remain competitive. But today, the prices are less than 2 lakhs, and in the next 2 years, it is expected to be less than 1.5 lakhs. Now, that said, if you look at it, what are these prices composed of? And from 2 lakhs to less than 1.5 lakhs or about 1.4 lakhs, how is it going to look like? The largest chunk of the price breakup of operation and maintenance tends to be the cleaning and grass cutting cost, right? This is the outsourced labor cost. There are some amazing speakers in the session today who will be touching upon both robotic model cleaning, and I'm sure some people will talk about grass cutting tools as well. The second major component that we have is tech manpower cost, which is the technical manpower, the engineers, the technicians, the project managers who are there on site. The third major cost head that we have, which is coupled up in total of others, is a combination of HV maintenance, and on top of that, there is supply chain for spares and consumables. I'll come to that in a second, but there's a combination of 4 or 5 headers. Then we have got security, which is again a significant portion, close to about 15% of the total cost. And lastly, there's transportation. Now, the way we assume that things are going to change over the next 2 years is first and foremost that sizes of projects are going to increase significantly. While this year, on average, we have received inquiries of an average size of project of 100 megawatt, we expect that in the next 2 years, the average size of inquiries are going to be about 400 to 500 megawatts. This is in sync with the bids that we are seeing today. This is in sync with some of the larger developer projections as well. Right? So the moment 150 megawatt becomes 450 megawatt, this manpower does not have to become triple. The cost at other places does not have to necessarily become triple. As a result of that, there are some automatic optimizations that tend to happen when you go larger in size. But that said, these optimizations of cost are not going to necessarily come at the cost of making the industry unsustainable. We believe that using technology, operation and maintenance can continue to be a sustainable business as long as we are serving by the right metrics. And I'll come to that in a second as well. Now let's do a double click on all of these major cost headings that are there. So tech manpower is expected to come down from 40,000 to about 30,000. A large part of this is because we will be requiring a lower number of people per megawatt. So till last year, we used to be having on an average, and this is me talking about the portfolio that we had been managing, but on an average, we were having about 5 megawatts per person on technical manpower side on site. Whereas in the larger projects, and with no short credit to the amazingly advanced automation and amazingly advanced analytics which has been made available to operators today, we are looking at 15 megawatts being handled by one person. The global average is also in that same range, in 15 to 20 megawatts being done by one person. In fact, there are directions to say that people will be able to manage plants at about 30 megawatts, 40 megawatts per person, 2, 3, 4 years down the line as well. Now, as a result of the automation, the computerized maintenance management systems, where you can completely automate everything right from your preventive to corrective to prescriptive maintenance, your inventory to crew movement, and a bunch of other stuff. And doing that along with analytics, which means that you are using people for the job that is going to give the maximum bang for buck. You're using people for the job that is going to have an impact on generation rather than mechanically following a schedule. Because of these two things, we are going to have a lower manpower cost going forward. The second major heading was security, where we are expecting the cost to come down from 25,000 rupees a megawatt to about half, which is 12,500 rupees a megawatt. Now, security is often a sensitive subject because it has local issues associated with it. People are promised jobs and they do not like it when those jobs are taken away. During project phase, there's a very large security. As it is, when you start the operations phase, the security becomes thinner and so on. But at a high level, what we believe is that if technology can be used, You can be having drones being used for surveillance. You can be having cameras with computer vision layer enabled on the cloud to detect intrusion, and many other such factors can be used in order to be able to at least in part optimize on the security cost. We are still going to require physical manpower on the ground because in case there is an intrusion happening, you'll have better systems to detect the intrusion, but a real human being will only be able to confront and stop the intrusion. Now, what happens is in many of the places, again, because of local issues, security is as it is compromised. So this is slightly a tricky topic, but irrespective of whether you are able to reduce or not your manpower on security, a technology solution will definitely give you a better sleep on at night. It will give you a better peace of mind because you will at least know the real picture of your site at any point of time instead of blindly depending on a local agency in which most of the people are locals, and God forbid if there is a theft, that too is largely going to be done by locals. So that's an issue of every security, but we believe there is optimization possible here. The third heading is module cleaning and grass cutting, and this was the biggest heading. We had 65,000 rupee cost, which is expected to come down to 40,000 rupees. Now, I would not steal the thunder of my other colleagues who are going to speak a lot more on this topic, but suffice to say that robots in many cases have got payback periods between 1 to 4 years, which is a profitable investment for module cleaning. Similarly, there are grass cutting robots also nowadays which are available. If the terrain of your plant so allows, a typical grass cutting robot can have a payback of as less than 1 year as well. Now, these are the elements which will help you to get the cost reduction, particularly on very large sites. This makes a lot of sense. And if you have been able to integrate this at the time of your project design stage as well, that's going to become a miraculous recipe for you to have long-term dependability as well as lower cost. The others cost is a catch-all phrase for everything else that exists in the operation and maintenance for different costs. But we are going to have reduction in admin cost because of the larger megawatts under management, larger size of the projects, and hence lesser people required to manage the larger megawatts at the head offices. We are also going to look at large super contractors who are going to have 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 megawatts of portfolio. And these people will have their own central EHV testing team, their own module testing labs, their own central specialized team for different kind of maintenance activities. If you're looking at quarterly maintenance of your inverters, you're not going to be dependent on semi-skilled, somewhat skilled technician on the side. You are going to, the operator is going to mobilize a specialized team, which is only responsible to mobilize at different sites and do the quarterly O&M maintenance of the inverter and move on to the next after that. Same applies to transformers and other HV equipment and so on. This, coupled with scale and better SCM efficiencies, is expected to get the cost from 45,000 rupees per megawatt to about 30,000 rupees per megawatt. Now, all of this is very interesting from a cost decrease perspective, but I would like to touch upon a different way of thinking about operation and maintenance. Some of our customers, some of the people in the audience are already well aware of this model. In fact, they have been the beacon leading this model also. But at a high level, there are two kinds of models which are there. One is the traditional operation and maintenance model. The traditional operation and maintenance model entails that you pay an operator a fixed fee, and against that fixed fee, you expect a certain service. And there is an LD clause, of course, etc., that is there, but you do not give him any kind of generation upside. Whatever margins he's expected to earn, he's expected to earn from the fixed fee. The second model, the new gen operation maintenance, O&M 2.0, if you may, that model is around giving even more aggressive fees to the operator, but giving him an upside in case they are able to improve generation. Now, the way these models are different is if you look at the maths, if at one place you're getting 1.5 lakh rupees and say there is a 10,000 rupee per megawatt margin that the operator is able to command from that, he's able to get a 7% impact for himself. Now, in this case, the operator is not incentivized to improve the generation of the plant. So generation upside sharing is zero, and generation improvement is also going to be zero. And the impact to owner is that in 150,000 rupees, he was able to actually 10,000 of that is margin. So he has that minus 10,000 rupees for a second, if you could take that example. Now, the other optimized generation model is where you are actually paying the operator 1,40,000. So you're not paying him his margin, you're paying him the bare bones cost, right? But there is a generation upside sharing to the tune of about 25% of whatever improvement in generation you can deliver. This should, and if you're able to deliver a 3% kind of a generation improvement, it will lead to an impact of about 1,08,000 rupees of improved revenue in the hands of the owner. But since 25% is being shared, this is the 75%. Since 25% is being shared with the operator as well, the margins of the operator tend to be 26% instead of 7%. So there is no conflict of interest. In the first model in traditional O&M, the operator is trying to get the maximum juice done with minimum cost spent. So entire focus is on cost optimization, which is a fundamental conflict of interest. There is actually an alignment of interest in this 2.0, in this new gen operation maintenance model, wherein both are incentivized to improve the generation. They are willing to invest in improving the generation because they know that a big profit only sits then when you are able to improve generation. Now we are seeing increasingly contracts coming in with this 25%, 10%, different kind of upside generation clauses built in. But a very key important parameter over here is this assumption of 3% improved generation. Will technology be able to do this? We believe that it will be able to do this. In fact, Prescinto in a 25 megawatt plant had been able to improve an impact of 8.6% on overall generation. We had a target generation, the green bars are the target and the blue bars are the actual generation. In December 2019, we had Prescinto deployed. And if you'll see, the earlier part was before Prescinto was deployed, we had a minus 5.5% target versus actual. After Prescinto got deployed, it was a plus 3.5% or so. As a result of which, we had an 8.6% impact or a 3.2 crore impact per year annual generation improvement revenue for the customer. A couple of ways in which this generation improvement can be made possible is that platforms like us, and there are others as well, are able to get into a depth of loss bucketing that is just not possible manually. A typical 100 megawatt solar plant throws out 10 million data points a day. Nobody manually can figure out around these things. Now, people like Prescinto, like us, we are able to get the loss bucketing in radiation, curtailment, clipping, shadow, inverter efficiency, grid outage, temperature. We are able to tell you what is controllable, what is not. And with these 11 specific root causes at plant level, inverter level, and at string level, you get very specific granular work orders on which you can act to improve upon generation. Typically, it will take between 40 to 60 work orders to improve generation by 1%. And we have seen people using Prescinto have been able to improve generation in the range of 3%, upwards of 7% as well. Another way in which generation improvement is possible is by leveraging 6 different kind of data sets all on a single data cloud so that you are able to correlate the drone data with the weather data, with the time series data, with the work orders data, and so on. So you should be able to say that table A is overperforming table B by 30% because the sixth module from the left on table B has 2 hotspots, which was changed 2 months down the line. Platforms like Prescinto are today able to do that, and that will also lead to unlocking of generation improvement. But it doesn't just stop on what we have built. We have to look at much more going forward. We all know that we have got energy storage coming up in a huge way. And for energy storage and platforms, digital platforms should be able to leverage solar, wind, and energy storage all on a common place. So on one side, we would be able to improve generation for the owner. The other side, with using energy storage, we should also be able to improve the price of power that is being sold either on the exchange or to a third party. That's having a double impact for the owner. These are just some of the ways that we can create that generation impact and as a result get the upside as operators, keeping a win-win situation for the owners as well. Very happy and proud that this innovation is getting recognized all over the world and in India as well. So thank you. Probably I'll just end with that. I think it's bang on time.
Yeah, you still have, I guess, about 2 to 3 minutes left for your presentation, but that's okay. That gives us a lot of time for questions then. Thank you for that excellent presentation and for setting, the entire baseline for the day. And for our delegates, I now request them that if they would like to have, ask some questions to Mr. Jaggi, they can post them on the Q&A or the chat box, and I'll then put those questions up to him. But a few questions from me first, Mr. Jaggi. that you did speak about solar projects in general, but I wanted to understand that how does O&M differ for ground mounted and rooftop projects? Like which sort of projects are more challenging? And now with the floating solar also coming up in a big way, so what are the different sort of challenges that O&M players see in these different categories of projects?
That's a super relevant question. So I would put this in two categories. One is utility scale projects, which are large scale. It can be a very large rooftop, or it can be a very large ground mounted, or it can be even floating solar for that matter. They have one kind of dynamics. There are technical challenges that you need to face over there, but those technical challenges are all falling in one bucket. The other bucket is distributed generation, which is 10, 20, 50, 100, 200, 500 kind of kilowatt systems. Now, you cannot be having the same DNA to be able to operate both of these systems efficiently. You need to have separate teams, separate mindsets, separate tools to be able to do that. In one place, it is all about being able to rectify the fault as soon as possible. Actually, in both cases, that is relevant. But in rooftop, you need to add the fact that there is no dedicated manpower there at the site all the time to be able to do it. So it's also about optimizing what they call truck rolls in the US, right? So you need to make sure that your manpower is most optimally utilized. So in case of operation maintenance on rooftops, you need to look at a cluster, which means single city should be able to give you a decent number of scale to be able to do operation and maintenance profitably. You also need to be able to understand that you are not going to have all the different kind of expertise available to you at all times. So the engineer that you hire needs to be at a level of expertise where they can take care of all level 1, level 2 problems themselves and so on. In my personal experience, I have found it more challenging to manage rooftops than to manage utility scale plants now.
Okay. And so with so many technology providers from across the world now entering the Indian O&M space, how have the O&M costs traditionally in India compared with the global numbers?
For one, the global operators make a huge margin, on an average about 25 to 30% margins. The Indian operators, if not making a loss, are able to make single digit margins. That I'm already sure about,
Okay.
right? But other than that, I would say that India today is the most cost competitive market when it comes to operation and maintenance cost all across the world. And I do not mean this only for US or European market. I also mean in the more upcoming markets of Southeast Asia and Middle East. When you
Hmm.
compare, for example, the MENA region rates with the rates that we have in India, India
Hmm.
happens to be the most competitive, the most cutthroat market that at least we have come across. There is going to be a huge role of technology, and with global competition coming in, I think the role of technology will only get more and more emboldened,
Hmm.
which is in general a good thing for the sector.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I think that will lead to more efficiencies um, and more streamlining as well.
All right. And so you did say that, a major chunk of O&M costs in India comprises of the manpower that we require for module cleaning or vegetation or even security for that matter. So how do you see, manpower uh, costs changing over the next few years, especially with, automation and digitalization? And this is a sort of, a difficult question to answer, but do you think it fair that, the job which manpower can do being taken up or, by robotics or drones? Because this is a question that, everybody is asking these days.
So, ma'am, very honestly, I don't think that it is about taking the job away of a human being by a robot. It's about reskilling. I mean, it's the same thing as saying that we had a generation of woodcutters, and when industrial revolution happened, what will happen to the woodcutters? Well, the people will get retrained for the industrial revolution to work in factories. It's something the same, and this is an unescapable truth of evolution of science and technology, that people will have to learn and unlearn new and new things all the time. So yes, that engineer or technician or that labor who was currently doing model cleaning will have to get reskilled to do something better. Maybe he will become a drone operator. Maybe he will be able to become a good SCADA operator. Maybe
Hmm.
he will become analyst. That way he will probably able to provide better for the family. What
Hmm.
we have as a responsibility to the community, local as well as global, is that we need to invest in training of the people. We cannot leave the local communities behind, which is something which is, I think, at the center of a lot of people, a lot of owners nowadays, the local community development and upliftment as well. So people will get reskilled and not get replaced necessarily. That's at least my view on this, ma'am.
Right. And post-COVID, have you seen a lot more integration of these advanced digital tools in Indian solar plants as well?
Yes, indeed. We have seen people try to move on or try to take digital transformation in general a lot more seriously than it was pre-COVID.
Mm.
We are seeing people right from having face recognitions on sites to be able to monitor the vaccination status. We are seeing the entire maintenance go online. We are seeing a bunch of push towards digital transformation of operation maintenance post-COVID. It was
Mm.
not that earlier it was not relevant, but now it is inescapable. Now it is important for survival itself.
Right. I'll take a few audience questions now because I see lot of them cropping up on my screen now, and then I'll move on to my questions if time
Sure.
permits. So the first question is from Mr. Bharat. He wants to know that will large operators do captive O&M, and how much value can such specialists add?
I'm sorry, I couldn't get the question. Could you repeat, ma'am?
Sure. So Mr. Bharat wants to know that will large operators also do captive O&M, like O&M of captive solar plants, and how much
Right.
value can such specialists add?
So I assume the references to the likes of, say, Adani and Greenco and so on, people who have got very, very large fleet of solar projects and who also operate their solar projects themselves. Well,
Hmm.
that is a model which is being pioneered by a few, not by the entire industry. I
Hmm.
think it all comes down to the DNA of the company. If the DNA of the owner is that of, say, a financial investor, you would see them always banking on a third party operator because they
Hmm.
consider that generation is their core business, not maintenance. But if the
Hmm.
DNA is a lot more industrial in nature, like Adani or Greenco for that matter, you will see that they will be doing more hands-on maintenance themselves. There is
Hmm.
no right formula. People are trying out different things in different times, and both formulas working out well. We have
Hmm.
known examples of all the kind of owners try out different operators and then gravitating towards what makes the most sense for them, ma'am.
Right, right. And so you spoke about the likes of Adani and Greenco, but what about these smaller players? Like, do they go for specialized O&M providers, or do they also, prefer to get O&M done by the EPC who, sort of set up their projects? Or like
So
what?
there are two parts of the question, man. Typically, during the defect liability period, when the EPC is also responsible for the quality of the work that has been done,
Hmm.
right? So during that period, I think the owners tend to stick with the EPC player, which is around in the range of about 1 year to 3 years most of the times.
Hmm.
But we are seeing that the specialist operators tend to
Hmm.
have a, a, a somewhat more better preference once that defect liability period is over for
Right.
good reason. I mean, once again, EPC players are great at engineering, procurement, and construction, not
Hmm.
necessarily in maintenance.
Right.
With that said, there is in terms and conditions applied that India's largest operator is Sterling Wilson, which is also India's largest EPC. Right, so there are exceptions to the rule, but in most of the cases we have seen that large EPCs are replaced with a turnkey professional operator
Hmm.
once the defect liability gets over.
Right. Okay. And another question is that, what is the O&M cost of floating solar in he's written and hot and cold deserts, but I think he means what is the O&M cost of floating solar in hot and
It's
cold
very,
deserts?
very, very, very specific question. I'm afraid we would need to. So we have got like for some of the customers who are already in the audience, they would know that we have got a 150 line item cost model that goes into every maintenance cost optimization. So we would need to really figure it out. On an average, a floating solar would cost anywhere in the range of 20 to 25% higher than a fixed solar plant.
Okay. Because of the, the specialized divers, etc., that you need.
Everything. It's about accessibility. It's sometimes about divers. Actually, divers वगैरह मतलब so we tend not to get into those details. We look at specialists, and many times that even gets excluded from the scope. But that said, the sheer accessibility of the site, the extra effort that you need to make sure that all the equipment is working in high humid conditions, things are rust free, etc., etc. It's a lot more complicated essentially.
Right. But like we have seen a few studies where they say that, the soiling losses definitely reduce in case of floating solar projects because,
Yeah, so that is the impact on generation improvement, ma'am. It's not as if you are not going to clean the panels. In fact, cleaning becomes all the more difficult when it is on a floating solar project. While the generation impact on soiling losses can be better when it comes to floating solar, the cost tends to go up.
all right, understood. The next question is from Mr. Uma Maheshwar Rao, that in the new Gen O&M model, what is the basis to fix the baseline generation to measure improved generation?
It is actually a negotiation that you undertake with the customer every time you sit across the table. But at a very high level, what you are able to do is that whatever is the previous year's generation, you kind of optimize that for anything major which was avoidable, which you know can be avoided, and you try to work on that. If the plant is absolutely new, then we need to work on PV numbers and the performance ratio test that has been done at the end of at the end of the commissioning of the plant. Right.
Right.
So those are just some of the ways that we end up determining, but this is a very, very specific negotiation that you need to do on a client by client, customer basis.
Right. The next question is from Mr. Siddharth Marthak. If we prepare a preventive maintenance schedule as per OEM guidelines, it engages entire O&M team for 365 days. Does that mean that manless operation of a solar plant is a dream?
Uh, Not necessarily, actually.
Hmm.
First and foremost, the preventive maintenance as a methodology is a relic of the thermal plant. So, when India started solar back in 2010, the only skill set that was available back then was the people working in thermal plants. And in thermal plants, people swear by preventive maintenance. You cannot let a turbine shut or a boiler shut. That is just not possible.
Hmm.
As a result of which, a lot of maintenance gets done in a similar way in solar plants also, because it was all designed by the same people. It is
Hmm.
not necessary to be done that way. You can have a lot more condition-based maintenance in solar. I mean, very simple example is, instead of trying to clean all the modules at same frequency throughout the year, probably it's a better approach to clean those which are next to the highway, or those which are in the way of a wind gust better. And again, platforms like Prescinto are able to tell you soiling loss at different modules in different times of the year. So it's much better to take that approach rather than having a spray and pray approach of doing equal cleaning, equal checking, everything equally done on the entire plant.
Right.
That said, even if we are looking at following a preventive maintenance task, that doesn't mean that necessarily it has to be an all hands on deck all the time, all people on site kind of a scenario. As I mentioned in my presentation also, as portfolios become larger, as operators become larger, they'll have specialized teams for specialized tasks. Maybe
Right.
there is going to be a general admin operator at site at all time. And by the way, the Indian Electricity Act also mandates you to have a couple of people necessarily at a site in case you're connected to high voltage systems. But that said, the specialized crew will come in and go out depending on where the requirements are.
Right. And I think I have time for just one more question. So, according to you, what is the next big thing in solar O&M?
Ma'am, I believe that operation maintenance, much like any other business, is going to become a digital business rather than a physical business. Is going to be people with the analytical skills, people with the automation skills, people who are being able to lead the digital transformation,
Hmm.
that are going to be that are going to be actually operating the plant, and much less people who have got good access to labor and people who are good at managing a large fleet of manpower. That's the direction that I believe that the field will take.
Right. And this one delegate who has posted one more short question, if you can take that up as well. So, what will be the O&M cost in deserts where new solar parks like, Khavda, etc., being set up?
I think when I mentioned that 450 megawatt kind of project, those are the places in which these projects are being set. I'm pretty confident that the cost with all the optimizations we are talking about will end up coming in the range of about 1.5 lakhs or
Hmm.
lower.
Hmm. All right. Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Jaggi, for taking time out and for an excellent presentation and answering all of our questions as well.